Welcome to our Sound for Video session. Today is the 22nd of July, 2017. We're going to do something a little different today and talk a little bit about studio monitors, near-field monitors. These are used for processing your audio and mixing, things of that nature. So somebody wise once told me that the best places to invest your money if you're doing audio is in the ends of the signal chains. What he meant by that was that the gear that interacts with the analog world are the ones where you're going to get a lot of bang for your buck, and you're not necessarily going to have to replace them very often. And that's going to include things like microphones, because microphones are taking actual waves, sound waves, and converting them to electrical signals. And then likewise, on the other end of the signal chain, you have monitors or speakers, which are taking a signal. And by the time they get to this gear, it's already an analog electrical signal, and then this converts it to actual sound waves. So the reason those are a good place to invest your money is that you're going to get a lot of life out of them usually if you buy quality products. And so from my point of view, it's a good place to spend a little bit more money. And in fact, I think it's probably one of the best places to start spending your money and then fill in the other pieces later on. Obviously, you have to have something to record to, so a recorder, which is somewhere in the middle of the signal chain, is necessary as well. But if you're going to splurge in one area and have to cut back in another, I would splurge more in the areas like microphones and speakers or monitors and go with lower end recorders initially until you can afford something a little bit more capable. So let's talk a little bit about monitors. So first of all, I've been using and mixing and processing audio with these KRK Rokit G2s for probably 5 to 7 years. I lost track. I've had them for a long time. The current version is a G3, so they're on the next generation. They currently run $250 each, so that's one important thing about monitors. If you are looking at buying them, the powered monitors, which you would use for mixing and audio processing, typically are sold individually. So you have to buy 2 of them if you're going to do stereo mixing and monitoring. So that's the first thing to keep in mind. So a set of them would be $500. Originally, I bought these at the time they came out, and when I bought them, they were decent. A lot of reviewers were saying that they had a fairly even frequency response, and I think that's actually pretty true. I'm not finding that they overly emphasize any one part of the frequency spectrum more than the other. Some people say they're a little bassy, but I haven't found that to be overwhelmingly the case. So for me, they're okay. In terms of features, so it's a system with 2 drivers. So there is a tweeter, which reproduces the higher frequencies, and a woofer, in this case an 8-inch woofer that reproduces the lower frequencies. And the tweeter is a silk dome or a soft dome tweeter. It's a pretty traditional form of tweeter, and that's kind of, I would say, of these monitors, that's kind of their weakest point. I think they do a pretty decent job reproducing bass. On the high end, they do a fine job producing the right amplitude of output at the higher frequencies. But what I find is that the higher frequencies get a little bit smeared. And what I mean by that in particular is that it's hard to distinguish, especially if you're talking about music, mixing dialogue, music, and effects. Sometimes things get lost in the mix and you just can't hear them very well because these tweeters just can't reproduce them very well. So they just kind of get smeared together. And sometimes what I find too is that because this can't differentiate different frequencies very well, or different instruments or sound sources very well, that when I'm doing a mix, sometimes I have to put my headphones on and I'm able to identify places where I'm starting to get distortion because there's too much going on in a particular frequency, which these I can't tell that with. These just can't reproduce that and you can't hear it. So that's one of the risks with these right here. Now, I haven't listened to the G3s, so they may be better. They put a lot of effort, I know, into these. This is their kind of entry line, and but they also make much higher end speakers. So I think a lot of the technologies they develop for their higher end speakers and monitors end up making it down into these as well. The case or the cabinet here is made out of plastic and MDF, or medium density fiberboard, so it's a wood product. And then I think this waveguide here, the front piece is, I believe, plastic, kind of a high quality plastic. It's held up very nicely and it seems to do well. To reproduce lower frequency bass, this has a port down here. You'll see that on a lot of monitors. They put a port in because then the monitor can then produce lower frequency sound. And to me, that's always been a little bit of a trade-off. Actually, everything about monitor design and speaker design is a trade-off. So in this particular case, I think sometimes I guess the risk with a ported design is that the port can actually resonate at a certain frequency. So it can overemphasize certain frequencies over others. So there's one potential problem there. There are also some other issues that I don't entirely understand, but I guess essentially, if you're playing some really bass heavy pieces, that you can actually get the actual air moving in and out can mess with things as well. So in any case, this does have a ported design. The nice thing at least is that they did put the port on the front, which is nice, because if you're set up like I am here, where you have the back of the monitors, pretty close to a corner, the problem is that bass often builds up in corners, and that's where it starts to create problems, where it will just sort of create, it'll either a standing wave, or it just will, it'll stay and resonate in the room for so long that it will start to interfere with other frequencies as well. So having the port on the front at least keeps it from going straight into the corner and just building up there. And you'll notice that that's the case with also with these Focals here, the CMS 65s. They also have a front port. So that I appreciate. This one does have a Class AB amplifier with I think the total was about 100 amps, or sorry, 100 watts. I wouldn't worry as much about that. The Class A versus B versus C versus D is a discussion for another time. But this does have two amplifiers, one for the tweeter and one for the woofer. So it separates that job a little bit, which is good and nice. It also, in terms of inputs, it has two balanced inputs on XLR and then the other one on TRS, so 1/4 inch and XLR, and also an unbalanced input on an RCA plug. So that's nice as well. And then it does have two adjustments. I can't show those to you here very well, but it does have one for the high frequency. You can cut it by up to 2 dB or boost it by 1 dB. So you can kind of tune this to your room. And then it also has an overall volume control, which allows you to decrease the output volume by 30 dB or increase it by 6 dB. So that whole range there. So that's nice as well. It also has a universal power supply, so you can use it in places where you're using 110 volts or 200 and I think up to 240 volts. So you can use it pretty much anywhere in the world. So that is the KRK Rokits. Now, like I said, these have actually been pretty decent monitors, and they were pretty affordable for professional or prosumer level monitors. But again, that high frequency is where things get a little challenging for me sometimes. And since I'm starting to do more and more mixing for films, I've kind of outgrown these in some ways, and that's why I've been looking, actually for well over a year now, I've been trying different monitors. So let me tell you about some others here. B&H was kind enough to send me a couple here that I really, really enjoyed. First is this Focal CMS 65 and the Focal Shape 65. Now, this is the older line that's going out right now, so there's still some of these in stock at various retailers. And I'll talk about, and the price is actually fairly steeply discounted right now. So these are actually worth looking at. Not only for that, of course, and we'll talk about the technical specs as well, but the Shape 65 is replacing the CMS in Focal's lineup. And these are a very, very different design, very different monitor than this. So we'll talk about each of them in turn. So first of all, let's go back to the CMS 65. This is a solid aluminum cabinet. It is amazing. This thing is heavy. What's also unique about the Focals is that they use inverted dome tweeters. So it's in this particular case, it's an aluminum magnesium, and the dome, instead of kind of sticking out, is actually inverted. So it actually goes in, and then on this particular one, you'll see there's what's called a phase plug on it as well. So it has this little thing that comes out over the tweeter. It's part of its design. I don't understand entirely what that does, but that's kind of one of the unique design features of this. Again, it's ported on the front. It does have a volume control up front, which is really nice as well. That's something that a lot of monitors don't have. And then you have to rely instead on your audio interface or have a monitor controller to control the monitor's volume. Now, that's not a big deal. My main audio interface here is an Antelope Audio Orion Studio, and it's got a great volume control monitor controller built into it. So I don't generally need that, but when I do hook up a smaller audio interface like the Sound Devices Mix Pre 6, it is nice to have that monitor volume control up front. So kind of a nice feature there. This has a larger variety of, essentially, there's a high pass filter on the back here, so you can tune it to your room. So if you're finding that you're working in a room that's not treated with bass traps, like what we've got here, or even when you are treated with bass traps, still you can get some funny things going on in terms of bass building up. And so this has got a high pass filter on the back here, which is pretty nice. And so you can adjust it. I'm not going to dive into all those details, I guess, but that's a nice feature here. So you can kind of tune it to your room. If you are having some problems with a lot of low frequency buildup, you can cut that off a little bit, and that will make things work a little bit better in terms of your ability to hear everything and keeping all that bass from building up and interfering with other frequencies. But it also has a variety of other, it has a low shelf, a kind of a low mid-range adjustment, and a high frequency shelf as well. And then it also has a selector here, so you can select the input level. So if you're bringing in a consumer line level, you can tell it that, or a professional line level, you can tell it that as well. So lots of things to adjust here. Also, in terms of inputs, it has both balanced and unbalanced inputs. The balanced input is an XLR, and the unbalanced is RCA. Now, just subjectively, let me talk about this for a minute here. The huge difference I see, well, first of all, price on this one, these are $595 per monitor. So a set of them is going to cost you about $1,200. The big difference between this and this, the articulation, the clarity, the precision that you hear in the higher frequencies is so much better on this versus this. And that's what you really get when you're spending that additional money. So again, these prices that I list here, by the way, are just as of the time that we do this session. They can change. And in fact, these again have been discontinued and replaced by this. So these, if you are interested in these, they're going to be available for probably just a short time, I would assume. So that's the huge difference between these that I notice. I also noticed that from a subjective point of view, it seems like the bass is on the Focal here versus the KRK is a little bit more controlled. And by that, I mean, it doesn't seem to, a lot of times people will say tight, the bass is tight. I think what they mean by that in particular is that it's articulated. It's not just a big mushy, massive wall of bass coming at you. You can actually hear differences between bass notes. On this one seemed to struggle a little bit more than this one did with that. So there's some playback systems will have what we call one note bass issues, where all the bass notes will sound nice and low and rich, but it will all be the same exact frequency, and just a lot of bass at the same frequency. This actually, it does a nice job at articulating those different frequencies, even down at the low end. So that is the CMS 65 from Focal. Again, it's been discontinued and is being replaced with this here. Some of the retailers I know, B&H, still have this. It was originally, I believe, I think $795 for each of these, and now it's down to $595. So they're pretty nicely discounted right now if you are interested in those. Moving on to the Focal Shape 65. These are unique in a lot of different ways. You'll notice, first of all, there is no port. This is a very different design from that standpoint. So instead of having a port, you will notice that they have what look like additional woofers on the side. In fact, this is a passive radiator. So this does not have a magnet behind it. This just resonates. It moves in sympathy with the woofer down here. So instead of using a port to reproduce those low frequencies, instead this is using those passive radiators, and it has one on both sides actually. So kind of a slightly different approach to accomplishing the same thing. There's always trade-offs. I talked about some of the weaknesses of ports or potential issues with ports if they're not really well designed. And this is working around that issue by not using a port, but instead it's taking on the potential risks of issues that come along with passive radiators. But I found that it works and it sounds really, really great in my particular room at least. It doesn't seem as though the bass kind of builds up and just goes crazy in this room and creates all sorts of problems. It seems pretty well controlled. And what's interesting to me is that I don't know what happens with the physics. Like when this woofer cone is back, does that mean that these are out? And I think that is the case. So they're kind of moving opposite like that. And I would think that that would create phase issues at some point. But I don't know. It doesn't seem to. It seems to have very clean, fairly articulate bass as well. And I've been very happy with that. Also very different about this is using a medium density fiberboard case or cabinet as well. That's another compromise that you make with different materials. So with the CMS line, they went with this solid aluminum, so it doesn't give a whole lot. Medium density fiberboard will give a little bit, but there are probably some other properties to it that I don't understand. In any case, this one, they did go back to medium density fiberboard, and it's got a laminate on top. So it has kind of a cool look. I like how the wood has this 90-degree bend in it here. But I think that has something to do with the speaker design as well. I don't think it's all just looks, not entirely sure. This one also has the inverted aluminum magnesium tweeter. And this one likewise, just like the CMS, produces really, really nice high frequencies where you can really hear the precision. You can hear each of the different sound sources in your recording, and it's able to play those back so that you can actually make each of them out. Whereas, again, like I mentioned on the lower end monitors, oftentimes you get this kind of smeared image where you really can't make out all the individual sound sources. So that's really nice on this one as well. This one likewise has balanced and unbalanced input. So you've got XLR balanced input, you have RCA unbalanced input. One thing this one does not have is it does not have the volume control up front. So I kind of missed that. It also has a feature that kind of puts it in sleep mode. You'll notice here the LED is red. That means it's in sleep mode right now. And it will come back on once you start playing something back from your computer or audio interface or whatever. I found that to be a little bit problematic because I'd be working on something and I'd kind of get on doing something else that wasn't going to require any playback for about 15 minutes. And these would go to sleep. And then when I went to play back, it's like you had to really kind of push a pretty strong signal through there to get these to wake back up, and it takes some time. I wish there were some way to kind of set that or fine tune it or make, set its sensitivity or perhaps turn that feature off. Because I've got everything hooked up to my power conditioner down here and I just turn that off once everything's off. So it's not like it's not like it's using power 24/7 even when I'm not using it. So in any case, that is what it is, I guess. This one also very fortunately has, I think, the high-pass filter, which again is very good for helping to tune this to your particular room. In fact, this is one of the first, it's not the first, but one of the first non-ported speaker designs that I've used fairly extensively. And I should say also for these, I did you do a kind of a burn-in or whatever you want to call it period. So they each have about 30 hours plus on them. So I was able to do that before we did any measurements or anything of that nature. Again, has a high pass filter, also has the same adjustments here for the low frequency shelf, the low mid frequency EQ, and then a high frequency shelf as well. So plenty of options back there. And no volume overall volume control. That all has to be controlled by your either a monitor controller or your audio interface. That made this one a little bit tricky to use with the MixPre 6 as an audio interface. So sending audio from the MixPre 6 to this on an unbalanced input, the volume that came out was just a little overwhelming, even at the lowest gain setting on the MixPre output gain setting. And so it worked great once I used a DI box to convert the output signal from the MixPre to an input here on this, but it would be nice to have a volume control on that. So that's one thing they moved away from here. So between these two, This one, in terms of spec, can actually produce bass at a lower frequency, I believe, than this one. I know this one was rated at 45 hertz. I don't even know what these are rated at here, but evidently this can go lower. Did I notice that in a lot of cases? Well, I'm not doing a lot of like action movies and things of that nature where you have those sub bass, you know, to kind of emphasize explosions and things of that nature. So for me, it doesn't really make a huge difference. If you were doing a lot of that, this might be a better choice if you're going to operate them without a subwoofer and you wanted this to be able to produce all that bass for you. So that's one thing to consider. All right. What else can I tell you about that one? I think that's everything I wanted to tell you about those. I will say this as well. These two are fantastic to work with. I've had a really good experience with both of these. And I think they're very fairly priced. I think at this point, since this one's being discontinued, $600 for this monitor is a fantastic deal. It really is. So a set of these, so I guess that would be, what, $1,200 for a set of these. That would put these at, these are $899 each, so that would put these at $1,800 for a set. That's getting into a fair bit more of an investment. So you have to be pretty serious about them at that point. Do I think it's a fair price? Yeah, I do think it's a fair price. Let me just talk about the kind of the next step up from this one. So whereas this one comes in at $900, Focal also makes their kind of premium line of professional near-field monitor speakers. And their next line is called the Solo6. And the Solo6 features something that's fairly significantly different. It's actually a ported design. It's actually made out of wood, and I don't think it's medium density fiberboard. I believe it's actual wood. It has, oh, actually one other thing before I move on, I'll come back to the Solo6. This one also has a flaxen, the material in the woofer is flax sandwiched between essentially some kind of fiberglass. Does that make a difference? I couldn't hear a difference between this and this in terms of its overall bass reproduction, you know, in light of the fact that this is using a different material for its woofer. They both sounded very, very nice. So in any case, moving back to the Solo6 Be, the big difference with the Solo6 Be is that I believe it has a wood cabinet, or at least pieces of it are wood, and I believe that's solid wood. And then its tweeter is also the inverted dome tweeter, but it's made out of a different material, namely beryllium. And evidently, according to Focal, beryllium is the ultimate material to use for a tweeter. And I don't know all the reasons behind that in terms of physics, but I did get a chance to listen to the Solo6 Bees just this last week. In fact, it was I went to the Pro Audio shop here in town, and they happened to have a set there in their listening room. I went to go buy some cables, so I wasn't even there for that. It was my birthday, though, so I took a little extra time to go listen to some monitors, and I got to listen to the Solo6 Bees, and they sound phenomenal. The tweeters and the ability that those tweeters have to reproduce the high frequencies in such precision it's a difference you could hear. We were able to A/B the Shape 65s and the Solo6s next to each other, so I was able to switch back and forth. And it does make a significant difference. Again, the precision is just amazing. Next to the Solos, these sounded still quite good. They sounded still very, very good, I should say. But the Solo6s just, they really took it to the next level. So there comes a point, though, where things start to get a little silly in terms of how much money you pay and how much kind of actual benefit you get from that. So once we start moving up into that range, or beyond that range, my feeling is that probably beyond that range, I don't know that there's really a lot of reason to do something like that. At that point, it just becomes it becomes a kind of engineer preference at that point. For me, the Solo6 Bs would be the ultimate reference monitors for my purposes. And what I haven't decided yet, I have to actually send these back to B&H. They were just on loan. What I haven't decided yet is, do I buy one of these sets or do I save up and go for the Solo6s? Because again, I'm starting to do more and more mixing, and for me, having the articulation and the precision that these have makes it a lot easier to get my mixing done on to keep moving. and I'm not struggling and kind of switching between headphones and these other monitors trying to figure out if I've got a problem or missing problems altogether because I just couldn't hear them. So I have to make some decisions here on whether I'm going to go with one of these or save up for the Solo6s. So Solo6s, again, are $1,300 each. So you're looking at $3,600 for a set. That's a lot of money, but to keep it in perspective, if you are doing mixing professionally, there are a lot of, if you can compare that to DPs, directors of photography, $10,000 on a camera for an owner-operator director of photography is pretty normal. And a camera is not going to last nearly as long as monitors are. So, am I justifying this to myself to talk myself into it? I don't know, but just something to keep in mind. Incidentally, while I was at the Pro Audio Shop here in town, I did get to listen to some other monitors I'd like to talk about for just a minute here. PreSonus makes some budget monitors called their R65 AMTs. And what's unique about those monitors is they run about $300 each. They have, instead of a dome tweeter, they have a ribbon tweeter. And another company that's really kind of made these famous is Atom. Atom makes their A7x monitors, which I've listened to as well. And those are really beautiful monitors. Again, the articulation in the higher frequencies is just phenomenal. This PreSonus also has those for a pretty amazing price point, $300. It has a 6.5-inch woofer. I got to listen to those next to these and next to the Solo6s, and they're certainly not in the same league. Don't get me wrong, but if you are working in a budget that's closer to $600 for a set of monitors, I was pretty impressed with those PreSonuses. Now, at this point in my career, I probably wouldn't buy those, but if I were at that point in my career where it was either, something more like the Rokits, the KRK Rokits, or the PreSonuses, I would definitely go for the PreSonuses. Now, the ribbon tweeters do have a cost that come with them. PreSonus sells it actually also as a positive, and I think there always are two sides to every story, but not every story, but most stories. The problem with ribbon tweeters is that if you get out of the sweet spot, the frequency response just goes haywire. So you've got to be in the sweet spot to really reap the benefits of that particular type of technology. But when you are in the sweet spot, it's incredible. It's really, really good. And I've heard that on the Atoms as well. So my understanding is that they're pretty good at projecting this direction, but they're not good projecting the other direction. So that means that when you buy those monitors, you need to really get them set up and tuned in to where you're going to be sitting and working from most of the time. So, for example, that's why you see that these are on stands. These stands are custom made so that when I'm sitting in my chair, the tweeters are right at ear level. And it was made actually for these monitors originally, so I may have to adjust them when I get my next set, which will be a different height most likely. But in any case, that's one of the risks or the costs, I guess, with ribbon monitors, or ribbon tweeters, is that if you're not in the sweet spot, then you're not getting the whole benefit. And so what that means is if you're working in a lot of cases where you're mixing with multiple people in the room, that could become pretty problematic pretty quickly. So because you can't tune it to every individual seat within the room. So that's one thing to keep in mind as well. All right, I think that's everything I wanted to talk about today on monitoring. Again, for those of you, we had originally planned to do a question and answer session this week, and a couple of you submitted questions. I apologize. I had to do this today. I forgot that these are actually, I need to get these back to B&H. They're wondering where their monitors are. And I actually like them so much, I'm half tempted to just keep them, but I do need to send them back. So in any case, I hope that was helpful for you, just a kind of an overall discussion about monitoring for post-processing and mixing film and video. And if you have any questions, go ahead and leave those down below. Hope you're having a good time making some good recordings and good mixes, and we will talk to you again next week. Take care, everybody. If you'd like to improve your audio quality for your sound and video projects, we've got 3 courses that you may be interested in over at school.learnlightandsound.com. First, if you want to learn how to record great sound for your film and video projects, we have a Production Sound Fundamentals class where you can learn all of the skills necessary to record sound in a variety of situations for different types of film and video projects. Once you've recorded your sound, one of the next steps is to process the dialogue audio. And in our second course on processing dialogue audio using Adobe Audition, we cover all of the fundamentals there and even get into some of the more advanced topics, including loudness normalization. And most recently, we added a course on how to get the most out of your Sound Devices Mix Pre 3 or Mix Pre 6 field recorder. I hope you found this episode helpful, and we'll talk to you again soon.